Hey everybody, get ready to use your vote in the up and coming Irish general election.
Welcome to Enable Ireland's Virtual Service Week 1 podcast, Enable Talks.
Yeah, so we're getting ready to talk accessible voting, right?
Yeah, that's right, Sean.
Yeah, because not everyone could just waltz into the polling station on election day.
Absolutely. And that's where Enable Ireland's Virtual Service comes in. We actually did a presentation about this recently, just to help people get ready for the general election.
Okay, cool.
So, what did they highlight?
Like, what are some of the different ways to vote? You just can't show up at the polls. Well, first off, Irish law is all about inclusivity. They want everyone to have a voice, but sometimes figuring out your options can be a little tricky.
Yeah, too true, Sean, too true.
So, if we're going to break it down, start with the two main alternatives: postal voting and special voting in hospitals and nursing homes.
Okay, wait, hold on. So, are those like totally different from like needing a different polling place or a little extra help in the voting booths, are they?
You got it, they're totally separate options. But let's start with postal voting because it's actually got a major makeover thanks to the 2022 Electoral Reform Act.
Yep, that's exactly what we're talking about here. Progress, isn't it?
Yeah, so the biggest change with the new act.
It's flexibility. It's all about the rolling register now, isn't it?
Okay.
You can update your voter details absolutely any time except right before an election. Did you know that?
Interesting. Why the pre-election blackout?
Well, think about it. Last minute changes could really mess things up. It's all about keeping things fair and making sure the process runs smoothly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Use your vote, it counts, they say. We're going to show you the way.
Jason spoke to Poric, one of Enable Ireland's virtual support workers on the virtual service around accessible voting. Let's see what Poric had to say.
Okay, so now we're going to hear from people with the lived experience of voting. So first up, we have Poric Dormer from Dublin. Poric, can you tell us a bit about your past experience and voting in previous elections?
Well, like you said, I have voted in a lot of elections and referendums. But when I lived in my old house, my polling station was not accessible from the front of the building, but I did get in the building to vote because I went around the back. Because I think everyone should vote. But now my polling station is very accessible. I roll in on my wheelchair and I go to my polling station and I get the return officer, and the return officer puts the next where I want it, but she only does what I instruct her to do. So that's good. Voting to me is always a human right. Disability votes count.
And thank you very much for that, Poric. That was really informative. Thanks again.
Use your vote, it counts, they say. We're going to show you the way.
Back to postal voting. Who can actually apply for it these days?
Well, good news, Sean. It's been expanded to include people dealing with mental illness or disabilities.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's so important to recognise that accessibility isn't just about, ramps and stuff. It's about meeting all kinds of needs.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do you actually apply for a postal vote?
It's pretty straightforward. You need the PV2 application form. We'll put a link in the show notes, and just be mindful of the deadlines.
The deadlines?
Yeah, so for a general election, it's 2 days after the Dáil is dissolved.
Oh, that's quite close, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But other types of elections have longer deadlines, like, presidential, European or local elections. You get 22 days for those, excluding Sundays and holidays, of course.
Okay, I got it. So postal voting is pretty user-friendly, yeah? But what happens if you're all set to vote in person and then you realise your polling station is not accessible?
Yeah, you're right to bring that up. Remember those June 7th elections? Not all the polling stations were fully accessible.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a huge problem, especially for those who use wheelchairs and have other mobility issues.
Exactly. And that's why it's important to plan ahead.
So what can you do if you find yourself in that situation?
Reach out to your local returning officer at least a week before election day. Send them a written request to change your polling station.
Okay, so knowing your constituency is key here. And here's a pro tip. You can actually suggest a more accessible polling station in your request.
That's a great point. The returning officer will either approve your suggestion or find another suitable option for you.
Okay, and then what?
They'll send you written permission. Make sure you bring it with you on election day along with your ID.
Okay, got it. Got it, Sean. Thanks. And no switching back to your original polling station at the last minute, right?
Once you've been approved for a new polling station, you're locked in.
Makes perfect sense. Okay. So you've made it to your designated polling station, but then you realize, oh, I need help with the actual process. What are your options?
No worries, there's help available. You can have a companion assist you, or the presiding officer can help, or you can even use a ballot paper template. Each option offers different level of support.
Companion sounds kind of cool, like your trusty voting buddy, really. So who qualifies to become a companion?
Anyone with a visual impairment, physical disabilities, or who has difficulty reading or writing can have a companion.
So they basically guide you through the voting process, do they?
Pretty much. You can actually mark the ballot. They can actually mark the ballot paper for you, but only based on your instructions, of course.
Well, I bet there has to be some rules about who can be a companion, right? Like you can't just bring your best friend along, can you?
You're right about that. It's about protecting your integrity to vote.
Okay, get that, yeah.
So, for example, your companion has to be at least 16 years old. They can't be a candidate or working for a candidate.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about the presiding officer? What can they do?
They can help you too, and the eligibility is the same as for the companion, but there's a key difference. The presiding officer marks the ballot based only on what you tell them. No written notes allowed.
Wow, that's interesting. That is. But what if it's super busy on the election day? Will the presiding officer still have time to help?
That's a good question. It's always best to arrive early because at least 2 hours before the polling closes, the presiding officer might have to say no if it's going to hold up other voters.
So get there early. Okay, what about privacy? Is there any guarantee of privacy when getting help from a presiding officer?
Absolutely. They're required to protect your privacy, so they'll take you to a private area, and if you have to, they can either clear the whole polling station if needed.
Right, that's actually really reassuring. Okay, so look, let's talk about the ballot paper template. What is this exactly? Does it like decode the ballot or something like that? Does it? What does it do?
Not quite, but it's super helpful for people who are visually impaired and want to vote independently.
Okay.
It's basically a transparent plastic sheet that goes over the ballot paper. It has a raised print and braille, so you can both feel and read the options.
That's pretty cool. And those templates, are they going to be available in all polling stations?
You got it. Just ask the presiding officer and they'll provide you with one.
Wow, you know what? It's amazing how many options there is out there. It's really empowering stuff.
Right, it's all about making sure everyone has a voice.
And I have to say, I'm really fascinated by the whole companion thing. It's just amazing that somebody actually can actually help you, to mark the ballot paper, and it still stays totally secret.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure. They're like your representative inside the polling booth, but they have to follow some pretty strict rules, to protect the whole election process.
Okay, so rule time. Yeah, we know they got to be at least 16. Can't be a candidate themselves or, working for the campaign. But what else is there?
Well, one biggie is they can only help a maximum of 2 people during a single election or referendum.
Yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. You wouldn't want anyone swaying like a ton of votes or anything.
Exactly. It's all about keeping things fair and above board. Another really important point is that they can only mark the ballot based on your exact instructions. No guessing, picking for you. It has to be your choice.
So it's like a team for you and your companion working together to make sure your vote is cast right and that it stays secret.
That's a great way to put it. It's all about empowering you to vote no matter what challenges you might face.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Okay, let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about the presiding officer. They're kind of like the conductor of the whole voting orchestra, right? Making sure everything runs smoothly.
I like that analogy, yes. The responsibility for fairness, order, and secrecy during the entire voting process.
We touched on their role in helping voters, but what are some of their other responsibilities? And what does a typical day look like for them at the polling station?
Oh, it's a busy day for sure. They start by setting everything up, making sure all the materials are in place. Then they supervise the poll clerks who are responsible for checking IDs and giving out ballot papers.
They've got their hands full, like the guardians of the voting process, making sure nobody breaks the rules, really, yeah?
They also keep things running smoothly in the polling station, answer any questions, address concerns, and make sure everyone feels safe and respected.
That's really important. Having a calm and organized atmosphere really makes a difference in the whole experience.
Couldn't agree more. And of course, their top priority is to protect secrecy of the ballot.
Absolutely. And that's the foundation of a fair election, really. So, how do they make sure every vote stays confidential?
They make sure everyone has privacy to mark their ballot. And they're always on the lookout for anyone trying to sneak a peek or influence somebody else to vote.
You know what? I bet they've actually seen some interesting stuff. What are some of the most common questions they get from voters, do you know?
Believe it or not, one of the most frequent questions is just, am I in the right place? People want to make sure they're in the correct polling station for their address.
Yeah, that kind of makes a lot of sense, especially if you've moved recently or if the polling station has changed, right?
Another common one is the ID requirements. People want to make sure they have acceptable identification, so the presiding officer helps clear that up.
It's kind of like having a walking, talking encyclopedia of voting knowledge right there with you. They're a super valuable resource for anyone who needs help or clarification. That's what they do.
For sure. And remember, we talked about this earlier. They can also help voters directly if they need assistance walking them through the process and making sure their vote is cast correctly and privately.
So it's a pretty big job being a presiding officer. They need to be organised, knowledgeable, and really dedicated to make sure the election is fair and accessible for everybody. Yeah.
Well said. They're the unsung heroes of democracy, working hard behind the scenes and making sure every single vote matters.
Totally agree. I just say learning about all those different ways to vote has been eye-opening.
Yeah, me too. It's really inspiring to see how Irish law is constantly evolving to make sure everyone has the chance to participate in our democracy.
Use your vote, it counts, they say. We're going to show you the way.
Jason spoke to Valerie, a stakeholder in Enable Ireland. Valerie shared her insights on accessible voting and the importance of participating in elections.
We're here today with Valerie Wheelan from Dublin. Valerie, how do you feel about the different options now available for accessibility around voting, like postal voting, getting help from a companion? Do you think these are actually effective?
Yeah, well, Jason, I haven't done postal voting, but I've done the companion voting. Yeah, it's been okay, but the way technology is gone now, I would like to see in the near future a more kind of technical side of voting. The way each candidate has a picture. Maybe you could put a thumbprint in the middle of the picture, biometric. Having me said, technology come a long way. I'm not knocking the way the voting system is, but I'm just saying that with technology could be improved. And I think technology could be used to enhance the way people will disabilities vote, because disability vote counts.
Thank you for that, Valerie. Valerie, can I ask you also, why should we vote?
Why should we vote? Because I'm a bit worried because any leaflets that I got through my door and I've read, the politicians, they have nothing on the agenda to do with disabilities. Why is that? Do we not count? Are we not people? Do we not live in society?
Thank you, Valerie. That's a really, really strong point about how technology can be used to assist people when they vote.
Use your vote, it counts, they say. We're going to show you the way. Side by
We covered a ton of ground: postal voting, navigating these polling stations, getting help from companions and presiding officers, even those cool new ballot paper templates. But I bet there's even more stuff out there, right? Like resources and stuff to help people make sure that their vote counts.
Absolutely. This Enable Talks podcast is just scratching the surface. There's a whole world of information awaiting to be explored.
Okay, so spill the beans. Where should our listeners go to find out more? There's the Electoral Commission of Ireland's website. It's like a one-stop shop for all things voting. You can register to vote, check your polling station, learn about different types of elections. It's got everything, really.
Exactly. And if you have any specific questions or concerns, don't hesitate to contact your local returning officer. They're the experts. They can give you personalised guidance.
So true. Okay, now we've covered all of the options. Let's wrap things up with some practical tips, just to make sure the voting experience goes as smooth as possible.
Love it. First things first, familiarise yourself with the whole process before election day. Understand options that are available to you, where you're supposed to vote. Gather all your documents like your ID.
Yeah, I suppose if you look at it like packing for a vacation, you don't want to be running around at the last minute looking for your passport.
Exactly. And if you're planning to vote in person, it's always a good idea to visit your polling station beforehand, especially if you have any accessibility concerns.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, you can scope out the locations, see if there's any barriers, and make any necessary arrangements. Just make sure everything goes smoothly on election day.
Smart. And remember, folks, never be afraid to ask for help, whether it's from a companion, the presiding officer, or even just a friendly face at the polling station. There's people there to support you every step of the way.
Couldn't agree more. Your vote is your voice. It's your chance to shape the future of Ireland. So don't let anything stop you from making it count.
Well said. Well said. No matter what challenges you might face, there is a way to make your vote count in the Irish general election.
use your vote, it counts, they say. We're going to show you the way. Side by
Jason also spoke to Glenn Hayes about voting. Let's see what Glenn had to say.
I'm here today with Glenn Hayes from Limerick. Hello, Glenn. Glenn, can
Hello.
you tell me why disability votes count?
Your votes count because if you don't vote, you don't have a choice in the way the country's been run. It's stay the same. So if you don't vote, you won't have a voice of the way things are going to run in Ireland.
Thanks for that, Glenn.
use your vote, it counts, they say. We're going to show you the way. Side by
Now, let's wrap up the Enable Talks podcast. I'll leave you with this thought. Knowing all of this, what steps will you take to make sure your vote is cast in a way that works for you? Take some time to think about it and then go out there and make your voice heard.
That's a great question to ponder and remember, everyone. This information is for informational purposes only. For all details on the most up-to-date information, always check official sources like the Electoral Commission of Ireland's website.
Thanks for joining us on Enable Ireland Talks podcast. See you next time.
Disability votes count.